Good evening and good afternoon, depending on where you are joining us from. And welcome to this third conversation in our spring speaker series, Artists Envisioning a Green New Deal. And this is an extension of our Climate Change Theater Action 2021 season, which is taking place this fall. The Green New Deal calls for protecting and enforcing the sovereignty and land rights of Indigenous people and supporting and investing in vulnerable frontline communities. So today's conversation focuses on Indigenous sovereignty. My name is Chantal Bilodeau. I am the artistic director of the Arctic Cycle. I see some of you have already started introducing yourself, but please feel free to continue using the chat. And you're also welcome to use the chat to comment as we go on with this conversation. There will be a formal time reserved for questions at the end. Well, we'll take questions from you and ask the panelists to respond. There's a button at the bottom of your screen for live transcript if you need live captioning. Thank you to the Brabson and Educational Foundation for making this event possible. And before we go further, I want to acknowledge that the Arctic Cycle is located on the traditional lands of the Lenape people. And I want to pay my respect to them and other Indigenous caretakers of these lands and waters, and also to their elders who have lived here, who live here now, and who will live here in the future. And I want to extend this respect to all Indigenous people everywhere. I also want to acknowledge that today, May 5th, is the National Day of Awareness for Missing and Murdered Native Women and Girls. So it's an important day to acknowledge, I think, and we'll probably touch on that as we move further with this conversation. The American Indian and American Native in the US and First Nation, Inuit, and Métis women in Canada are murdered at a much higher rate than the national averages. And how this connects to climate change is that it has been shown that the fossil fuel industry definitely exacerbates the problem. There's a direct correlation between increased rates of sexual abuse, trafficking, and domestic violence against women and children in regions where fossil fuel extraction companies set up what they call men's camp to house workers. Today, I'm so happy to be talking with three amazing women. But before we start the conversation, I would like to invite Gigi Buddy to join me. Hi, Gigi. So, Gigi, do you want to say just briefly how you are connected to introduce yourself and say how you are connected to the Arctic Cycle?
Yes, of course. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us here today. My name is Gigi Buddy. I am Tongva Indian and Mescalero Apache, currently residing on Coast Miwok land. I am connected to the Arctic Cycle because I'm the intern. I'm an intern at the Arctic Cycle. I have been for almost a year now, which has been such a pleasure. So this is so exciting. Thank you for having me.
And we've been so lucky to have you. And even more lucky tonight because we asked Gigi, so with all of these conversations that we're doing, we make sure to include an artistic component because we're artists after all. And we want to not just talk, but also have an artistic experience. And so we asked Gigi if she wanted to perform two of her songs for us. So Gigi, I will turn it to you.
Thank you, Chantal. Okay, so I'm gonna perform two songs. I'd like to note that I have never performed these ever for anyone. So I'm really excited to share these with you. The first song that I'm gonna be singing is called Ursa Major. It's the first song that I ever really released. It is about the story of the celestial bear from the Iroquois tribe. This has a special place in my heart, and I hope you like it. So here we go. Chaos reigned the day you came. 100 different lives you lay claim. And now I go home to an empty space. 100 different losses I have to face. So 3 trees about once every year. No matter how far I go, I know you'll always appear. Oh, I love you so. Oh, I hate to go. They go far to track you down. Paw prints emerge from the ground to the highest peak. They climb it all, and straight into the sky they all fall. So we set out to find them. We came back empty-handed. 3 more losses we mourn, as 3 new stars had been born. Ursa Major, you're all that I see. No other constellation means as much to me. No matter how far I go, I'll always know your worth. I'll find you again real soon, where the lights touch the earth. Ursa Major, great bear, no fear. Your blood paints on trees about once every year. No matter how far I go, I know you'll always appear. Oh, I love you so. Oh, I hate to go. Thank you. I'm gonna pretend that you're all clapping right now. Thank you so much. Woo, nerves. The next song that I'm going to play, I have my handy dandy ukulele here with me. This song is quite literally, I think, the first song. Oh, thank you to everyone in the comments. This song is quite literally the first song that I think I ever wrote. I was really fortunate enough to go to Malaysia and Malaysian Borneo and spend time on the Baram River with the Indigenous people who live there, specifically the Kayan people. It was my first time out of the country, huge thing for me. And when I got back, I didn't really know how to talk about it. These are really big issues, really big topics that need to be addressed. And I just wasn't quite sure how to communicate it. And so I wrote a song. It doesn't really have a title. I think it's called Waters Untamed, but yeah. So this is from my time on the Baram River with the Kayan people. I hope you enjoy. The rivers are turning brown from all the upturned ground, the upturned ground. The birds, they don't sing to me, they can't fly from tree to tree. This reality, it's hitting me, and how does history repeat? It's all that power and greed. Oh, I really wish that they could see the rolling natural mountain hills, the long houses that they have built, people smiling even though they're losing their only home. The flowing waters are untamed. Oh, I come in and try to change this land. Oh, this land, it wasn't made for me and you. What does it take to get through to you? If we only knew, they can't fight this all alone. They need help to protect their home, protect their home. And how does history repeat when we've got the world at our feet? Oh, I I really wish that they could see the rolling natural mountain hills, the longhouses that they have built, people smiling even though they're losing their only home. The flowing waters are untamed, though I come in and try to change this land. This land, it wasn't made for me and you. What does it take to get through to you? If we only knew, maybe we could have stopped we could have stopped we could have stopped the barren, empty, dying hills, the culture they have tried to kill, people trying to survive. This is a land you cannot buy. Seeing this with your own eyes is harder than you realize. Acres of destruction and people fighting for their land. Oh, it wasn't made for me and you. What does it take to get through to you? If we only knew, if we only knew, if we only knew, if we only knew, if we only knew. Thank you.
Yay, Gigi. This is so wonderful. Please, I would invite all of the panelists to join us. It's such a beautiful example of what art can capture. You know, like you say, when we can't put something into words, how art can capture it and convey it in such a powerful way. Thank you for this wonderful beginning.
Thank you.
Welcome, Nikki, Kiki, thank you for joining us. I will, so Gigi's already introduced herself, so I will ask you to say a little bit about who you are. Yeah, let's start there. Maybe Nikki, do you want to go?
Thank you so much, and thanks Chantal and everybody for having me here. I'm so honored to be on this panel with these beautiful artists and activists, and Gigi, that was so gorgeous. Thank you so much. As I said, my name is Nikki Ducheneau, and unlike the rest of the panelists, I'm not an artist, I am an attorney. I'm a member of the Cheyenne River Sioux tribe, but I also come from the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes. I'm Bitterroot Salish. I am a founder and partner of Big Fire Law and Policy Group, which is a 100% Native owned law firm and majority Native woman owned law firm. But I have been very lucky over the years to represent my own tribe, the Cheyenne River Sioux tribe, which is a Lakota tribe, a member of the Oceti-Sakowee, and we are Sioux Indians, and this is my dorky joke. We love to sue and be sued, and not just because we're ornery, but because we have a lot of important rights that we need to vindicate in the courts, and we've been stepped on for years and years. So I have been very lucky to be lead counsel for my tribe in the Dakota Access Pipeline litigation, among other litigations. But again, I'm very honored to be here.
Thank you, Nikki. Kiki?
Thank you so much, Chantal, for inviting us here and bringing us here. Gigi, your song just made my tears fall out of my face. I'm just going to read my statement. I am Kiki. I'm the child of Andrea Rivera and Pui Pui Fuamatsu, the granddaughter of Mary and Edward Sino and Ingracio Rivera, Makarita Sangatu and Pui Pui Fuamatsu. I am Samoan and Filipino, born and raised on the island of Oahu, in the district of Waianae and the smaller yet largest Ahupua'a of Lualualei. Waianae is a small town with small town vibes and big time aloha for community. It's where I first learned aloha aina, or love for people and love for land. It's far west, so it's hot and isolating. I was surrounded by mountains. My grandmother remembers seeing World War II planes flying through the lowest part of the mountain range that overlooks our home. The military still occupies the land in front of our family property and reaches into the mountains. At night, we still hear explosives, military games, just practicing. Between the mountains and residents stand two red and white 1,500-foot VLF transmitters or radio towers in the US Navy uses to communicate to submerged submarines. As children, we were told that these radio towers would most likely cause leukemia and other cancers because we live so close to them. The overwhelming smell of pig farms masked the fears brought by military practice. My journey has brought me to the arts as a creator, but most of all as a champion for people of color, in particular, my Pacifica people in the arts. Being queer isn't at the core of my identity, but being from this ocean is. If lessons were islands that break the water's surface, I'd say that on this island, everything we see is real. And what is also real is everything we are not seeing or choose not to see. The world is expansive and there are many forces in it, so we're never alone in our journeys and we always have help. Expansion is life, so live and love and let there be joy in our hearts and at the center of our creations. Thank you so much for that space. Wow.
Thank you, Kiki. So I want to start by asking all three of you, since this speaker series is titled Artists Envisioning a Green New Deal, I'd love to know what, and because Indigenous sovereignty is part of the Green New Deal, I would love to know how you think about Indigenous sovereignty, like what relationship you have to it. You've all alluded to it a little bit, and how your work addresses the need to recognize and respect Indigenous land and culture. So maybe it's just a matter of expanding a little bit on what you've already said, but Kiki, I'll start with you again.
Yeah, so because I wanted to introduce myself that way so I can give you a little descriptor of the lands that raised me. I believe that we have to put First Peoples first, right, on their lands. And for in Hawaii, the First People are the Kanaka Maoli, who are always put last, usually because the two big oppressors in Hawaii is militarism and tourism. And so in my work, I try to address as much as possible just the responsibility that we have living in Hawaii, responsibility I have living in Hawaii, and how I can be of support to Kanaka Maoli by putting their needs first and putting their sovereignty first. And for this play that I wrote, Envisioning a Green New Deal, that was, I don't know how to envision what that is. It's such a huge concept. And so for myself, I needed to really break it down to home and what it would look like home in Hawaii. And for me, that would look like the military getting out and each community taking care of their own, which we can. We have all of the lessons from before us. We know how, if we were to follow the footsteps of the Kanaka Maoli, we know how to be sustainable on that land. So that's a little bit about my relationship with Indigenous sovereignty.
Thank you. And we'll come back to your play because I learned a lot from reading it and I want to talk about it a little bit more. But Gigi, I'll go to you. So you've already said, that you talked about your trip and how you have put that into your music. But I also want to know, like in your personal life and going through college and all of that, how you think about Indigenous sovereignty.
Yeah, yes, I feel like I have grown up in a predominantly white space. And so going to college and having a people and a space that embraced the land that we were on, the people that we were, our traditions, our backgrounds, was very new. But it also meant the world to me because I all of this, all the things that I have started to pour my heart into and my soul into, has mainly come from, ages 17 and up. I feel like the work, especially, as an artist, my music, I write about stories that mean a lot to me. And a lot of those stories are stories of creation, of life, of love, of the earth, that come from Indigenous peoples, like Ursa Major, the celestial bear from the Iroquois tribe. That's not my own story, but somehow through generations of oral storytelling, it has been passed down to me. And when I heard that, I knew that other people had to hear it. And I think music is a really great way to talk about that. As a student, I live on Coast Miwok land, where I am in the Bay Area, but I go to school on Tongva land, and I am Tongva. And so it's been really, really interesting to find how I'm connected to this space, and how I can also be a voice and a champion for this space that is so new to me, but is also not. So I hope that answered your question about my connection with Indigenous sovereignty.
Yes, it does. It does. Absolutely. Thank you. Nikki, can I turn the question to you?
Yes, thank you. Sovereignty is at the heart and core of everything that I do as an advocate for federally recognized Indian tribes. And we really address it in two ways. One of the aspects of our sovereignty that is really important to, particularly standing up and fighting for Unchimaka, our grandmother earth, and the water and the other resources that she stands for, is our power as tribes, as tribal governments, flowing from the treaties that our ancestors 7 generations ago entered into us, and the rights that they reserved for us to continue to be thriving, robust governments that have the power to govern ourselves and to protect our rights and resources. And so when we're fighting our legal battles, like in the Dakota Access Pipeline litigation, we're doing those from the perspective of those treaty rights. And those treaty rights belong to us because we were sovereign nations that negotiated them with the United States. So I am so lucky as a Lakota person that I have the ability to go into a federal courtroom today and fight for the earth and the water with these rights that my ancestors in the 1850s provided for us. And so that aspect of my sovereignty and my tribe's sovereignty is with me every single day. But the second aspect of it that is really important when you're thinking about the context of the Green New Deal is that aspect that I'm talking about with regard to being on the defense and going into court and defending Unchimaka and defending our rights, that's the defensive aspect of it. But we are now transitioning as modern tribal governments into the offensive, which means that we're using our sovereignty, our right to make laws within our own territory, on our reservations and in our treaty territory, to protect our rights and resources, and again, the land and the environment. And we have the ability as tribal governments, or my clients do as tribal governments, to create laws that are even better than what the states and what the federal government does. And I mean, it's not hard to be better than like the state of South Dakota or the United States. They don't always do an awesome job on the environment, but we don't have to wait for them to protect us. We can protect ourselves because we're sovereign nations and because we have those rights. So sovereignty is so important to protecting those things that are most important to us. And I work with it every day, and I'm very lucky.
And can you give us a few examples of maybe some of the progressive laws or the progressive things you've been able to do on tribal land that is lagging in the rest of the state or the US?
Sure. So the tribe that I'm enrolled in, the Cheyenne River Sioux tribe, we are currently working on coming up with basically the Rolls Royce of environmental statutes to govern us. But the tribe that I come from, my mother's tribe, the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribe, which is located in western Montana and one of the most beautiful places in the country, in the mountains near Flathead Lake. It's the Flathead Indian Reservation. That tribe has been very progressive on the environment for years and years. And for instance, back in the 70s, a group of 3 grandmas, and in Salish, those are called yayas, they call them the 3 yayas, got together and advocated to the tribal council to say, we need a wilderness area, this beautiful hundreds of thousands of acres of forest that we have on our reservation in the mountains needs to be preserved forever. So they created the first ever tribal wilderness, and it's a restricted area where you cannot do the kinds of things. You have to have permits for logging, and you can't go up there and develop it. But in addition to that, the tribe has very stringent water quality rules. They protect our animal brothers and sisters, but more than you could imagine it. It is amazing to me. And there are some environmental demographers who have said that in 50 years, the Flathead Indian Reservation is going to be one green spot in the United States that is untouched because of those progressive policies of the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes. And the tribe can do that because that is our territory, those are our lands. And there's nobody that can tell us not to do it, not the feds, not the state. And, you know, we care so much about our land and resources. So I'm so proud to come from that tribe as well.
Oops. And you did tell me also that I think you have a lot of wind turbines, right?
Pardon me?
Didn't you tell me that
That's
you have
right.
a lot of wind turbines? Yeah.
Yes, that's right. That's something that is really taking hold in Indian country, because back in the day when they started restricting our territory and making our reservations smaller, the United States was like, oh, well, we're going to give them this windswept arid place and keep all the good land for our homesteaders who we want to thrive. But what they didn't realize is that now when we're transitioning away from fossil fuels, that is such a rich resource for us, the wind that blows endlessly across the prairie. And tribes are really getting hip to it now. And there are entities and organizations starting up all over Indian country in these windy, crazy places where we are going to be the leaders in renewable energy. And again, on the Flathead Indian Reservation, the tribe back in the 80s started a process to acquire a hydroelectric dam on our reservation that had been there since the 30s. So the tribe now owns this hydroelectric dam and provides and sells this beautiful green energy, provides it to our tribe, but also sells it to non-Indians all around. And it's, you know, again, part of that effort to and commitment to green energy. So Indians leading the way, which I love.
Kiki, I want to turn it to you, especially, so I want to come back to the play that you wrote and this wind turbines, right? Because you brought up an issue that I had never heard of, and I would love to hear you talk about the play and talk about the story in the play.
Yeah, I wanted to bring up this issue because it was a tricky one. Because wind turbines usually are so great, right? Like in Indian country, it's right on. Like that's the clean energy we want. But then in Hawaii, the island is so small, and so this one particular situation where these wind turbines are built in this place called in Kahuku. So it's a small town on the island of Oahu that already has wind turbines, and some of them aren't being used. And the people of the community, mostly Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islanders who live there in that community, fought the building of some of the biggest wind turbines in the nation being built in their hometown. And they were fighting it because of the health hazards that it would bring to the community and the risks that it brought to the indigenous birds and bats of the area. and it was causing seizures and migraines and all kinds of health problems for the community. And so they were fighting it, their community as well as ours on the west side, because the wind turbines were being stored there on our side. And I thought it was such an interesting and tough tough battle, but at the same time, it's like the communities are speaking up about the problems of of the wind turbines being built. And so I just wonder in my play, like, at what cost do we work towards clean energy, if at the cost of Native peoples being sick? So I thought it was an appropriate time to just start that conversation, even if it's in a 5-minute play.
And another aspect that I really love about your play, both the play that you wrote for this year's Climate Change Theater Action, and the one you wrote for 2019, is how big of a role the ancestors play. I wonder if you can talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I think for myself, I know, and other Indigenous playwrights as well, ancestors are a huge part of the storytelling, because it's such an integral part of being and communicating with family. And so it's not something separate. It's not seen as separate. It's seen as a continuum. So I think that's also, when I think of playwriting now and myself as a playwright, and what it means to decolonize playwriting, and the context of of playwriting and how we're writing. For myself, it means bringing up the ancestors and our relationship with them, my relationship with them.
Thank you. Gigi, I know we've talked about the role, like an organization you've been part of at Pomona, and the new role you're going to play when you go back in the fall. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Yes, of course. So Pomona has this really wonderful thing called the Indigenous Peer Mentor Program, which is if you don't know what Pomona is, it's part of a 5-college consortium of schools. So it's Pomona, Pitzer, Scripps, Harvey Mudd, and CMC. And so the organization itself, the community that it is, the Indigenous Peer Mentor Program, is a space, both physical and emotional, for Indigenous students. So American Indians, Alaska Natives, Native Hawaiians, to have a place to build community in whatever way that is. There are lots of events that we host. Sometimes it's just, like dinners where everyone can get together and just talk. It's a safe space on campus for Indigenous students to be able to celebrate that part of their identity completely and fully without any reservation. It's also a place for me that helped me kind of reclaim portions of my identity that I had lost or that I was really having trouble finding. And so this upcoming fall, I'm going to be a head mentor for the Indigenous Peer Mentor Program, which basically means I'm just kind of like this mama bear for everybody, especially new incoming first years, as well as the people that we've already established in our community. I'm really excited to take on this role in being, a voice of guidance to help them through, arguably what is a huge transition in everyone's lives, going to college. And for some, I hope that I can also, be what other people were for me in helping people reclaim portions of their identity or see them more clearly. I feel, especially growing up in a predominantly white space, it was way too easy to lose sight of of those portions of my identity that meant so much, because my mom is Indigenous, my father is not. And the high school that I went to, I can, name 2 other Indigenous students, American Indian students that went to my school. And so there wasn't a lot of conversation around anything that had to do with Indigenous students, Indigenous sovereignty, which is upsetting. I think definitely it started to change during my senior year, and I felt much more comfortable. But so the Indigenous Peer Mentor Program at Pomona is a community, again, both physical space and emotional space, where students can celebrate their identity. And I am just very grateful to be a part of that.
And I think you will make a very good mama bear.
Thank you.
Nikki, can you, so when we talked earlier, you gave me an example of the wisdom and knowledge of Indigenous people that are recognized today, that are not recognized or valued today. And you talked about COVID and infectious diseases. So I wonder if you can talk about that again.
Yes. This past year, of course, we've all gone through this horror of the COVID-19 pandemic. And one of the things that I'm so proud of the Cheyenne River Sioux tribe, my tribe, for is that back in March and February of 2020, when we were first learning about the pandemic, my tribe just stepped up and began making really, really powerful public health decisions to protect our people from the virus. And of course, Indigenous populations are like a lot of other minority populations that we are particularly susceptible because of pre-existing conditions that are a result of poverty and oppression that's caused by our mainstream culture and white supremacy, frankly. And so we had to contend with that. And it's so much more important for us because when our old people die, we're losing aspects of our culture and who we are. So it's a public health issue, it's a cultural issue. So my tribe really stepped up really quickly and did things like instituting checkpoints on the entrances to our reservation, doing very, very robust contact tracing, instituting regulations early on that shut down public spaces and did work from home measures and things of that nature. And we had a very long fight with the state of South Dakota and ultimately the Trump administration over our checkpoints, which ended up in a lawsuit that I handled for the tribe, and we're ultimately, I think, in the process of settling potentially, but we did give the Trump administration a good fight. That being said, the point that I wanted to make is that what the mainstream population, the state of South Dakota, who was willing to jeopardize the health and safety of their people, did not understand about what we were doing. We were not trying to bully the rest of society by saying, we're going to have checkpoints, we're going to do this and that. We were really coming from the perspective of people and a nation as Indian people who had a very rather recent experience with the effects of a global pandemic or a society-wide pandemic with smallpox outbreaks that decimated 70–80% of our population in the 19th century. So, less than 200 years ago. And the effects of that, that losing that much of our population decimated, of course, the aspects of our culture, made our society weak. Made our nation weak. We would not have succumbed to the overwhelming force of the United States if it had not been for those diseases. And we would not have lost people that were, so many people that were important to us, and so many traditions and cultural aspects that were important to us. And so we brought that experience into the 21st century with an exercise of our sovereignty to protect our people, but it's very similar to the way that we view the environment. Going back in that same period of time, we have generational memory and knowledge of what it's like to watch your landscape and the resources that you rely on for your lifestyle and culture become raped and pillaged by industry and by things of that nature. So we know firsthand how important it is to protect those lands and waters. And we, protect the environment and we protect public health because of those experiences. And I believe that we have the ability as tribal people to be a model for everybody else, because as we saw as a nation how terrible COVID-19 was, we are now watching the inevitability of the rise of our seas and the consequences of our use of fossil fuels and our ignorance of methods to protect our environment. And hopefully the rest of mainstream society will look to what Native people are doing in our care for the earth and follow us. So our traditions, I think, should be a beacon for everybody else.
Absolutely, I agree with that. Kiki, you also gave me an example when we talked of Indigenous knowledge. So you recently moved to California a year ago, I think, right? And when we were talking, you mentioned how everything in Hawaii is land-based in terms of education, health, and how you didn't see the same thing when you moved here. So I was wondering if you could talk about that.
Sure. I think just recently I was meditating and wondering about what what the encounter would be like if Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders were to came to the shores of this land and meeting the indigenous people of this land, and what that encounter would be like. And I imagine that it was them trying to communicate about their relationship to land, and just being around a lot of the Native Hawaiian Pacific Islanders here, I don't see. I question what their relationship is to this land that they're on now, being so far away from our homelands, and how I noticed that it's very people based, and like we're fighting for our being recognized here, and fighting for resources, right, like everybody else, but yet the relationship goes it goes sideways, but not deep into the ground. It's not rooted in land. That's the best I can describe. And I just think it's really interesting. And what would it be like for us as guests on Turtle Island? What would it be like if we were to go back and figure out what is our relationship to this land, and how and our relationship to the Native people of this land, and how we can help and be stewards together. Yeah.
Thank you. Gigi, stories, right? You're in the theater, you're a singer, you tell stories. Stories are a big part of the native cultures everywhere. Was it consciously that you chose to go into a field where you would be telling stories, or like which one came first?
That's a great question. Yeah, I don't know if it was ever a conscious thing of I want to tell stories, and so that's why I do theater. But I think theater and storytelling have always been, I mean, not like theater, I wasn't put on a stage as a baby, but I mean, like the concept of performing and sharing with the world has always been a huge part of me. And growing up, my mom told my brother and I tons and tons of stories rooted in our culture, as well as taking us to like the Stanford powwow, which is the biggest powwow on the West Coast, which is incredible to witness and be a part of. But I think that it was probably unconscious that I made that decision, because the two have been so intertwined with who I am. Taking that step felt natural, normal. And I'm very privileged to, be able to take that step, be able to have a family that encourages and supports, a young woman in the arts. I know a lot of people can't say the same. And so I've been really lucky on that end. I also think that with especially telling Indigenous stories, it is so important, even for, non-natives to hear them. I mean, the Gabrielino Tongva Indians were enslaved on the San Gabriel mission. And so when we look back at their history, we look back at who we are, a large portion of our traditions and our culture has been wiped away due to Christianity, due to, colonization, just in general, like quite literally every other Indigenous, community on this earth. And so what does it mean to tell stories then? Storytelling as through Indigenous communities, especially with, my tribes, it's an oral tradition, and it's to pass down knowledge and tradition and fun, whatever it is, stories of life and creation. And I think that it's really important to highlight those things and say that, like these big religions that have, taken over the world and taken over, become part of lots of people's lives. That isn't the only answer to why we're here, or why we feel so connected to this land. And so even just, Ursa Major, I think, will always be my favorite, because I'll look up in the sky and I'll find the Big Dipper and I'll smile, because just thinking about a story that hunters of a tribe tracked this bear into the sky, and now there it sits. And so every fall, because it's wounded, it bleeds across the sky. And that's why the leaves change color in the fall. Yes, like, please celebrate that story and pass it on, share that, because there's knowledge rooted in within that. And maybe that story encourages you to learn more about the Iroquois tribe, or maybe, my song about Borneo, maybe that encourages people to learn more about the Indigenous people that are living on the Barram River and the environmental crises that are affecting them to this day so terribly. So I think that storytelling holds so much power. And if I can be just a little voice among, big waves and somehow make a bit of an impact, then I'm going to. And I am so privileged and lucky to be where I am and get to do the things that I can.
Mm. I love the Ursa Major story too. And I first encountered it. It was not called that way, but Madeleine Sayet in 2019, she wrote a play for Climate Change Theater Action that was exactly that story. And it was, it's so beautiful. So for people who are watching us, in a few minutes, we're going to start taking questions. So if you want to think about questions you may have and put them in the chat, now is the time. And before we do that, Nikki, I'm going to put you on the spot, since you're the only non-artist in the group. And I'm going to ask you, as a lawyer, what do you see the role of the arts and culture being in addressing all of our environmental issues?
Oh, I just really think there is such a huge role of arts and culture in addressing environmental issues. And it really plays out also in the legal arena. But one of the things about Native culture, and I think this is true of Native cultures across North America and maybe the world, is that there really is a holistic quality about the way our traditional lives were, that you really couldn't separate art from our daily lives, like the work that we did, the tools that we made to, sustain ourselves in hunting or preparing foods, or the clothes and regalia that we wear for everyday use, or regalia for religious ceremonies, or the songs and, of course, stories that we produce for our families and for traditions and for religious purposes. And, like one of the things that I did in the Dakota Access Pipeline litigation was brief the issue of the infringement of the pipeline on our religious freedom. And that required me to bring those artistic and cultural notions in front of the court, which was difficult because they're very private to us and because we've been persecuted in the past for the practice of our religion and for who we are as Indian people. It was a difficult thing to do. But in addition, in our protest movements in the Dakota Access Pipeline and Keystone XL pipeline movement, so much art has been created by protesters and by activists. And I really think particularly of the No Dapple song by the Cherry Creek Singers from the Cheyenne River Sioux Reservation, which is one of the most important works of art, I think, to come out of that movement, because that's how songs work in our community, that, they get developed in an important time and then they're shared across other tribes for generations. So you think of important honor songs and flag songs that came back with our people from World War II and Vietnam and were shared with permission by other tribes and are still played at powwows today. The AIM song, which you hear at almost every Indian gathering, and now this No Dapple song. And it just makes me feel so grateful and lucky that I come from this community that we can't help but make art. It's just a part of who we are, and we do it without even thinking about it. And it's so important to who we are in our lives. So it figures in our protest movements. And of course, it figures in our legal battles, because we do have, when we protect our culture, we do have to inform the court what our culture is.
And these are the things we remember also from the outside, not having been at those protests. We often will have an image of a banner or a song or something like that. So I see there are some questions in the chat. I would like to invite my colleague, Julia, who's here with us and is keeping an eye on the chat, to join us. Hi, Julia.
Hello, I'm Julia. I'm artistic producer of the Arctic Cycle. Thank you so much, Gigi, Kiki. Thank you for being here and sharing your words and presence with all of us. We do have some questions. So I'm gonna hop around a bit in the order, but one question, Nikki, this asker is curious about what you said about natural resources as necessary cultural resources, and then related to Gigi's point about wisdom embedded in nature, how does the irreplaceable value of specific landscapes and spaces relate to Indigenous resilience? Or in other words, would anyone care to share about how tradition and wisdom of ancestors relate with the capacity of Indigenous cultures to change and adapt? Open to, yeah.
I think I can answer that from my perspective. As I said, we challenged the Dakota Access Pipeline on the grounds of religious freedom. And the reason is that in addition to being, the Missouri River, which the pipeline is now under, it's not just that it sustains us in terms of providing us with the only clean fresh water that's available to us on both the Cheyenne River and Standing Rock Sioux reservations, but it's also sacred to us. It's sacred to us just as a thing, as a life-sustaining, life-giving force. And the water contained within it is also sacred to us. So not just the river itself, but the water. So many Wichoni we think of as water as life, but it really is the water of life. And we use that water in our ceremonies. We use it in the Inipi or Sweat Lodge ceremony, which is the precursor to all of our other sacraments. And so, if for that reason, water for Lakota people is a part of our culture. We need that clean, fresh water to practice our religion. And our religion is who we are. They tried to take it away from us in the 19th and 20th centuries, and we've only just gotten it back with the passage of the American Indian Religious Freedom Act was 1978, the year that I was born. And likewise, landscapes and specific places are essential to who we are. The Black Hills we believe that we came from there. We originated in a cave there. Bears Ears Monument for the tribes down in the Southwest the rivers in the Northwest that teem with salmon that make those people who they are. Those natural resources are part of our culture and our identity. And when extractive industries in the United States and others, hurt them and desecrate them and ruin them, they are taking away again who we are. It's another act of genocide against us. And so that's how we relate to those environments.
Thank you. Gigi or Kiki, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, it just reminds me of the fight on Mauna Wakea and the pure water source that are from the gods. Like, this is an ancestor. It is who Hawaii people are. And so when they want to put as gigantic, again, man with their big machines wanting to put it in onto natural resources, when they do that, they, like Nikki said, they take away from the people and the water source.
Do you have another question, Julia?
We sure do. So what would you want the white playwrights or makers attending this event who are writing about land, climate crisis, or visions of the future to consider as we continue doing this work?
I'll take that. I want more playwrights to consider, when they think about the climate crisis, think about Indigenous peoples and them as the first stewards of the land that you're on, and really create from that.
To go off of that, of just recognizing the history of the land that you're writing about and that you're on. I mean, I'm sure any playwright will do their due diligence with, making sure that their research is correct and accurate. But in terms of, decolonizing that space and being a white playwright, or being, someone who's not Native, I think definitely, what Kiki has said, and make sure that you really do understand the history, and you are doing your best to be an ally in every step of the way. I know I would appreciate that, in my opinion.
And maybe something, I mean, I'm responding as a white person, but maybe something as simple as saying, hey, Gigi, or hey, Kiki or Nikki, I'm writing about something in your area. Can I pick your brain?
And offer to compensate on top of that. I hear in the theater, cultural coordinators or cultural competency coordinators are becoming positions in works, so that folks are compensated for the labor that they bring in these creations. So we've kind of touched on suggestions for decolonizing American theater and ways to be an ally as a non-Indigenous person. So if anyone has any other thoughts on that, feel free. I'm going to take us to a more specific question. Kiki, you said you recently moved to California. This person is on Kauai and are planning to engage with several communities with different plays from CCTA. So do you think that you'll be coming back to Hawaii at all? And if so, would you want to participate in any of these events?
Aloha Kauai. Yes, I will be coming home in July, and I don't know, I might be staying home for a month. It depends on employment here. And I would love to participate in any of your events, or even virtually, right? We don't even have to be there anymore.
So whoever's asking that question, if you want to go through us, we can make sure to connect you, that you and Kiki are connected. I think we have time for one more.
Okay, cool. So this person recently saw the Invisible Hand documentary by Public Herald produced by Mark Ruffalo, which addresses rights of nation movement, giving legal personhood to environmental entities. So how do you think artists and storytellers can help spread this awareness and facilitate the process of making this a worldwide practice?
I'm probably not the obvious person to answer this question, but I will say when we were working on the Dakota Access Pipeline litigation, when it was really hot and heavy back in 2016 and 2017, I actually hooked up with one of my cousins who is a filmmaker, and we made a short film to raise awareness about the Cheyenne River Sioux tribe's role, because the Standing Rock Sioux tribe was getting all this money to fund their legal fight, and my tribe was running out of money. But that was such that was such an awesome process to watch her create this story that was so specific to our fight. And really told the story from our perspective. But of course, you guys all know that this sort of consciousness raising aspect of the arts is so important. I just really, I really loved watching that process as an attorney, watching her put it all together and weave these different interviews and stories together. So if you guys are thinking about creating art that highlights the fights that we're having to protect Unchimaka, we need our stories out there. And Indigenous storytellers and artists and creators are doing it, but we need our allies to also be out there, protecting our earth, because it's for all of us.
I think to go off of that as well, and just talking about, giving personhood to environmental entities. I think the arts and storytelling and theater is actually a really, really incredible way that you can do that, because you can personify things that otherwise aren't personified, like a tree that stands alone in the Amazon rainforest. There can be a whole play written about that, and written about this tree's life, even how it relates to history of how much how this tree has lived through history, and now it's going to be cut down. That in itself as a play would be so impactful, right? It would tell a story that we don't necessarily get to hear ever. We don't ever get to, see stories like this personified in a way that really connects to you. I think something that, science is so important to the environmental crisis, and learning about facts and figures and statistics of what is actually going on. Sometimes it can be really hard to swallow that. It can be really hard to understand that. And I think art is a really beautiful bridge that allows people who, don't necessarily completely understand our environmental crises and the statistics behind it. A play can take all of that and make it relatable, make it personal, make it so you feel like you're really connected to what's ever being talked about. So if it is just a lone tree in the Amazon, or it's a tribe in Borneo that you may have never heard of, somehow through art, you can feel more connected to it, and hopefully then take action from that. And so I think giving personhood to environmental entities in whatever capacity that is, art and storytelling can do that so beautifully. And I've seen it done. And it's been done for CCTA, a few different times as well. So yeah, that's what I have to say about that.
I do have a soft spot for non-human characters in plays. Thank you. We're already a few minutes over time, so I wish we could go on and on with this conversation. It's so great, and I'm so happy to be surrounded by these amazing women, but we're going to have to stop. I want to thank you all, our panelists, and Julia, and also Sierra, who's working in the background, who's our stage manager and is handling all of the tech. If you are interested in climate change theater action, you Google that, climatechangetheatertoaction.com. You can see all the ways, the description on how you can participate. The plays are available. We have 50 of them. Kiki wrote one of them. They will be, all the presentations would take place in the fall, so there's plenty of time to get involved. Our next conversation is another Climate Change Theater Action meetup. We did one recently. We're doing another one that will privilege the Eastern time zone. So if you're in Eastern Hemisphere time zone, so if you're in New York or the Northeast like I am, it will be very late at 11 p.m., but it will be at decent hours for everybody else. So if we, maybe Julia, if you can put the link in the chat, you can find more that way. Thank you for joining us. I'm sorry we didn't have time to answer all of the questions. And yeah, we'll see you again very soon.